Let me share something that could radically shift your life, if you can catch it in your spirit. God didn't give you a paycheck. He gave you an idea. You see, a paycheck is just evidence that you're building someone else's vision, not your own. You weren't created just to survive. You were created to be a solution, to bring answers, innovation, and impact to the earth. God placed divine downloads inside of you, and He called them ideas. But too often we trade those ideas for bi-weekly comfort and call it security. Let me be real with you. That's not security. That's spiritual amnesia. When God gives you an idea, He's not just giving you inspiration. He's placing a seed of dominion in your hands. Go back to Genesis. It doesn't say, and God gave Adam a job. No, it says, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Multiplication doesn't come from employment. It comes from innovation. Most people believe money comes from hard work. But the truth is, money comes from leverage. And your greatest leverage isn't your time. It's your mind. The enemy doesn't fear your job title. He fears your ideas. Why? Because when you step into the divine vision God has placed inside you, you become unstoppable. You've been praying, Lord, bless me with more. But have you honored the vision He already gave you? That thing keeping you up at night? That's not anxiety, that's strategy. Let me help you get this deep in your heart. A paycheck is predictable, but purpose is profitable. A paycheck is capped, defined by someone else's perception of your worth. But when you tap into your God-given idea, there's no ceiling on what you can earn or impact. You've got books inside of you, businesses inside of you, blueprints in your journals, and yet you're clocking in every day, asking for time and a half, while heaven is asking for obedience and faith. Faith without works is dead. But hear this, ideas without execution are dead too. You don't need more time, you need more courage. You don't need a raise, you need a revelation. God didn't make you average, He gave you an advantage. That advantage is called vision. And when you activate your vision, it transforms into value. So stop waiting on a promotion, start moving in your calling. You weren't created just to make a living. You were called to create a life. Some of you are drained, not because you're lazy, but because you're burying your brilliance under someone else's blueprint. You weren't designed for that. God placed something unique inside of you, and it's called purpose. Purpose always starts with a picture. That picture becomes a vision, and that vision manifests through an idea. Not just a random idea, but one that solves a problem, adds value, and blesses others. But here's the truth. When you ignore your ideas, you delay your destiny. That tug in your heart, that note in your phone, that sketch in your notebook that keeps calling you back, that's not coincidence. That's divine instruction. God speaks through ideas. He deposits strategy into your imagination, blueprints that carry breakthrough. But instead of moving on the idea, most people bury it. Bury it under fear, under doubt, under routine. They ask, what if it doesn't work? But the real question is, what if it does? What if that one idea opens the very door you've been fasting and praying for? Understand this. Your ideas aren't just for you. They are your assignment. Somebody's healing, breakthrough, or direction is connected to your obedience. That book you won't write, that business you won't build, that product you're afraid to launch. It was never just about your income. It was always about your impact. When God gives you an idea, He's not just offering you a chance to succeed. He's entrusting you with a mission. You're not chasing money. You're building meaning. And when you chase meaning with everything you've got, the money finds you. Let me remind you of this truth. You can never outperform your mindset. That's why so many people stay stuck. They pray for increase, but they think like employees. They want abundance, but they've been trained to settle for survival. A paycheck feels safe, but it can also be a cage if it keeps you from purpose. God didn't call you to comfort. He called you to impact. And impact doesn't come in the safe zone. It comes when you step beyond the predictable and start walking in what's possible. Every wealthy person you admire did one thing in common. They executed on an idea. They weren't more anointed. They weren't more talented. They were just more obedient. Obedient to move. Obedient to believe. Obedient to use what God gave them, even when it didn't make sense yet. The real difference between the broke and the blessed, it's not talent, it's obedience. You've been praying for provision, but God already gave it to you. It's called potential. The question is, will you activate it? Because an idea is like a seed. It may look small, but inside is a forest. When you write it down, it might feel insignificant. But when you plant it in the right environment, water it with discipline, and shine strategy on it like sunlight, it grows. But too many people are letting their seeds sit in the dark. They're overthinking, overplanning, under-executing. They're waiting for perfect conditions. But faith doesn't wait for perfect. Faith moves in purpose and trusts God for the outcome. You don't need more degrees. You don't need more credentials. What you need is to move on the idea God already gave you. The problem is rarely lack of resources. It's a lack of resourcefulness. Because when you commit to the vision, the resources will come. When you start building, the doors start opening. But heaven won't move on what you refuse to act on. Faith without works is dead. And ideas without action, they're buried treasure. What's inside you is not random. It's intentional, it's powerful, and it's profitable. But only if you put it to work. You've got million-dollar solutions inside of you. But you're stuck in $100 habits. Your job teaches you to think like a worker, but your idea trains you to think like a creator. One gives you just enough to get by. The other gives you overflow, so you can bless others too. And here's the beautiful part. When you start operating in your God-given idea, you begin to discover who you really are. Not just a laborer, not just a hustler, but a producer, a builder, a problem solver, a vessel of divine wisdom. Your greatest asset is not your time. It's not your skill set. It's not even your labor. It's your mind. God created your mind with the power to design, imagine, create, and bring things into existence. That's why the enemy never attacks your hands. He attacks your thoughts. Because if he can poison your thinking, he can contaminate your destiny. If he can convince you that you're just a worker, just a number on someone else's payroll, then he can keep you locked out of the promise God has already placed inside of you. But the moment you begin to renew your mind, everything changes. The word says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That means your next level is not about your bank account. It's about your brain. Transformation starts mentally before it ever shows up physically. Your income is a reflection of your mindset. Your results reflect your beliefs. If you think small, you'll live small. If you think survival, you'll stay in survival. But when you think kingdom, when you think overflow, when you think multiplication, you begin to attract what you believe. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Yes, God gave you ideas, but he also gave you a mind to protect them. Your mind is a vault. It's where heaven deposits vision. But if that vault is unguarded, the enemy will plant doubt, fear, and confusion. Every divine idea must pass through the gate of your mind. If your mind is filled with doubt, the seed will die before it even takes root. But when your mind is renewed, the seed becomes strategy, the idea becomes income, and the vision becomes value. Most people never access their God-given power. Not because they don't have it, but because they've been taught to work with their hands and never trained to think with their head. They've been conditioned to clock in, but never taught how to check in with their calling. They memorized formulas, but were never taught how to multiply ideas. They were told to follow rules, but never taught to follow revelation. So now, instead of using their mind to build wealth, they're using it to justify why they can't. But let me say this clearly. Your brain is not a storage unit. It's a manufacturing plant. You weren't created to just collect information. You were created to produce transformation. Every time you sit in silence, every time you meditate on the word, every time you close your eyes and envision the future, you're stepping into the creative process God designed specifically for you. That's why stillness is powerful. That's why focus is a weapon. Because in the quiet, the Holy Spirit speaks. And when he speaks, he gives you instructions. And when you obey those instructions, they become income-producing assets. They become legacies. They become solutions that shift your entire bloodline. But too many people don't guard their minds. They feed it junk. They binge on negativity. They scroll through comparison. They surround themselves with small thinkers and wonder why they feel stuck. Let me be real. Your atmosphere shapes your thoughts, and your thoughts shape your outcomes. If you want to go to another level, financially, spiritually, emotionally, You've got to change what you allow into your mental environment. Be intentional. Be aggressive. What you read, what you watch, who you talk to, what you meditate on, all of it matters. You can't create big if you're constantly consuming small. One God idea, just one, can change your life forever. But here's the truth. That idea will always pass through the filter of your belief system. If you don't believe it's possible, you won't pursue it. If you think too small, you'll shrink it before you even start. If you're afraid to fail, you'll forfeit the blessing before it ever reaches your hands. So before you even talk about launching the business, before you post the product, before you build the brand, you've got to upgrade your mindset. Ask yourself, do I really believe I'm capable of this? If the answer is no, it's not the strategy you need to change. It's the story you've been telling yourself. God didn't create you with a limited mind. He created you with the mind of Christ. That means you have access to divine wisdom, supernatural insight, eternal intelligence. You have the ability to see what others can't see, to hear what others overlook, to solve what others run from. That's the real difference between the wealthy and the average. It's not luck. It's not timing. It's thinking. The wealthy ask different questions. They think from possibility, not limitation. They don't say, can I afford this? They ask, how can I create this? They don't say, this is too big for me. They ask, who must I become to carry this? The real battlefield is not your job. It's not your circumstances. It's not even your past. The real fight is in your mind. If the enemy can defeat you in your thoughts, he doesn't need to defeat you anywhere else. Because once your mind is bound, your actions follow. But when your mind is free, you walk like someone who already won. You talk like someone who understands the assignment. You think like someone who's not waiting for a breakthrough. You are the breakthrough. And when you think like that, your ideas begin to manifest. Your voice gets clearer. Your confidence multiplies. Your business grows, not because the world changed, but because your thinking did. Every wealthy person you know didn't just experience a shift in income. They experienced a shift in identity. They stopped seeing themselves as consumers and started living as creators. They stopped asking for opportunities and started creating them. They stopped looking for jobs and started building systems. And it didn't start with a loan. It didn't start with a business partner. It didn't start with a government grant. It started with a decision to think differently, to believe boldly, to imagine fearlessly. Because God will never give you what your mind can't handle. If you want more, you have to become more mentally. You have to stretch your thoughts until your thinking is strong enough to carry the weight of your next. Because here's the raw truth. A job pays you to forget your own ideas. That's the system. It's designed to rent your time, silence your creativity, and trade your vision for a paycheck. You walk in the door full of purpose, full of fire, full of potential. But every day you stay in that system, you're being trained to ignore the very thing that could set you free. You're taught to follow instructions, not inspiration. You're rewarded for compliance, not creativity. You're told to stay in your lane, meet the quota, follow the script, don't question the structure. And before you know it, you've become a professional at playing small. Most people think a job equals security, but often it's just spiritual sedation. It numbs your hunger. It silences your questions. It keeps you busy enough not to build your own thing. It gives you just enough to stay, just enough to survive, just enough to settle. And because it's predictable, it becomes addictive. You start to believe the paycheck is your provision, and you forget that God is your source. You become so focused on, you've been so focused on performance reviews, you've started to ignore purpose revelations. So your gift sits on the shelf while your talent is being spent, making someone else wealthy. And the system? It knows exactly what it's doing. Because the moment you wake up to your own ideas, you become dangerous. Why? Because your ideas are disruptive. They challenge the status quo. They birth new industries. They build new economies. They break old rules. So instead of encouraging you to think, the system teaches you to repeat. Instead of investing in your innovation, it rewards your obedience. You're not paid to think freely. You're paid to think within a framework. And anything outside that framework, they label it unrealistic, irresponsible, or risky. But here's the truth. Staying small is the real risk. Ignoring your calling is the real danger. Because the more you silence your ideas, the louder regret becomes. See, the job is not the enemy. The problem is the limitation you've accepted as permanent. There's nothing wrong with starting at a job, but there is something wrong with staying there when God has already called you to build. When the job becomes your identity, your potential becomes imprisoned. And the paycheck, it becomes a leash. It starts controlling your decisions, dictating your dreams, and training you to believe that your time is more valuable than your talent. But God never gave you a job description. He gave you a life assignment, and that assignment is too big to fit inside someone else's company policy. You were born with divine instruction encoded in your spirit, and every time you suppress it for security, you lose a piece of your authentic self. That's why so many people feel empty, even in six-figure careers, because deep down, they know they're not doing what they were created to do. They're not building, they're not solving, they're not impacting, they're just maintaining, just repeating, just existing. But you weren't called to exist, you were called to create. The system will never encourage your creativity, because creation threatens control. Your ideas are dangerous to the system. That's why it fights so hard to make you forget them. There's a reason most breakthroughs don't happen in boardrooms. They happen in basements, in bedrooms, in cars, because that's where people give themselves permission to dream again. That's where people remember who they really are. You remember that you're not just an employee, you're an innovator, not just a staff member, but a strategist, not just a worker, but a world changer. And you don't discover that in the middle of your 9-to-5 routine. You discover that in the stillness, when you stop and ask, what did God put in me that I haven't used yet? The job teaches you to focus on tasks. Your idea pushes you to produce transformation. The job gives you structure. Your idea gives you strategy. The job offers you a ladder, but your idea gives you wings. A ladder might take you higher in someone else's company, but wings allow you to soar in your own calling. And wings don't have ceilings. You don't need permission to fly when you understand your purpose. All you need is faith and follow through, because the system will never hand you freedom. You have to choose it. Look around your job. You're surrounded by people who manage, not multiply. They manage schedules, manage systems, manage people, but few of them multiply vision. And that's because multiplication doesn't happen in meetings. It happens in movement. It happens the moment you take the idea God. It happens the moment you take the idea God gave you and stop waiting for perfect conditions before you move, because perfection is an illusion and faith is the reality. You've got to break your addiction to the illusion of stability so you can step into the revelation of purpose. What you're building might not make sense to your manager, but it makes perfect sense to your mission. The job says, play it safe. The idea says, walk by faith. The job says, wait your turn. The idea says, create your lane. The job says, here's what you're worth. The idea says, you're priceless. So the choice isn't between comfort and chaos. It's between average and anointing, between routine and revelation, between being paid to forget or choosing to remember. And if you ever dare to remember who you are, what you carry, and what God placed in your spirit, you'll start making moves that no paycheck could ever afford. Because your real compensation isn't the check you get every 2 weeks. It's the change you create when you walk in purpose. Multiplication doesn't come from employment. It comes from innovation. But too many people miss that principle because they've been trained to chase stability instead of creativity. The world teaches you to find security in a salary, but heaven teaches you to create overflow through strategy. You can't multiply what you're afraid to release, and most people never multiply because they're gripping a paycheck instead of planting the idea. Employment pays you to maintain. Innovation pays you to multiply. One preserves the system, the other disrupts it and builds something new. When God placed Adam in the garden, He didn't give him a job title. He gave him responsibility. Be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, have dominion. None of that sounds like employment. It sounds like ownership. It sounds like vision stewardship. It sounds like divine innovation. Multiplication is God's default setting. He's not a God of addition, and He's a God of increase. But increase doesn't come to the passive. It comes to the productive. It doesn't visit the busy. It visits the bold. And it will never come to those waiting on a boss to validate what heaven already confirmed. The difference between a paycheck and profit is one word: purpose. A paycheck is what you earn for following instructions. Profit is what you create by solving problems. One depends on your ability to show up. The other depends on your ability to think. God wired you to be a problem solver. That's why He gave you a mind full of ideas, not just a time card full of hours. Your multiplication is hiding in the problem you were born to solve, and solving it will require innovation, courage, strategy, execution. Not just attendance at a workplace. Employment teaches you to do. Innovation teaches you to design. Doing keeps your hands busy. Designing keeps your legacy building. When you innovate, you shift from worker to builder, from laborer to leader, from doer to developer, and developers walk in dominion because they understand how to take raw materials and transform them into systems, solutions, and structures. That's exactly how God created the world. He didn't build randomly. He built with intention. He took void and made vision. He spoke, he saw, he separated, and then he multiplied. That same divine creative process, it's encoded in you. But the system of employment often suppresses it, because you will never find multiplication in your comfort zone. You find it when you stretch, when you finally stop sitting on the idea and start building it, even without the full blueprint, even if it doesn't make sense yet, even if it's scary. Because the miracle is never in the job. The miracle is always in the motion. Most people pray for overflow, but stay stuck in a routine that was never designed to produce it. So here's the truth. It's not more money you need. It's more movement, more faith, more follow-through. Because God didn't just give you life to survive it. He gave you vision to transform it. So don't just make a living, make an impact, make a move, make history. Your job may be what you're doing, but your idea is who you're becoming. And when you start moving in that, that's when you stop living for a paycheck and start living for a purpose that pays in legacy. Most people are stuck in a position that only gives them just enough. But here's the truth. You can't multiply just enough. Multiplication begins when you shift your source from man to God. When you realize He gave you a mind that can produce in one moment of creativity more than you've made in an entire month of labor. Look around. Every business you see, every product you use, every platform you admire, none of it came from employment. It came from innovation. Somebody saw a gap and decided to fill it. Somebody heard a complaint and turned it into a company. Somebody faced a need and created a solution. Innovation always starts with observation. The most innovative people are the ones who stop ignoring the patterns around them. They stop accepting broken systems and start asking better questions. Why isn't there a better way? Why hasn't someone built this? What if I'm the one called to do it? Multiplication is not about speed, it's about systems. A job teaches you repetition, but innovation teaches you replication. And listen, you can't scale a schedule, but you can scale a solution. That's why your best investment isn't in hours worked, it's in ideas launched. Because once an idea is launched, it becomes a system, one that works even when you don't. That's where multiplication lives, in passive systems built from active obedience. You obey the idea, you design the structure, you implement the strategy, and the system begins to multiply without needing your constant presence. See, people confuse movement with progress. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're building. Just because you're showing up doesn't mean you're multiplying. Real builders know multiplication takes planning, intentionality, and yes, risk. But here's the problem. You can't multiply in a structure that punishes failure. That's why employment often stifles innovation, because the culture of perfection kills the spirit of creativity. But innovation requires failure. It requires faith moves. It requires starting, even when you don't know every step. And that's not something you'll learn by playing it safe inside someone else's plan. Innovation is not just about technology. It's about solving problems in a way that changes lives. You don't have to invent the next big app to multiply. You can multiply by creating a new offer, solving a deeper pain point, streamlining a broken system, or simply serving people with more excellence than anyone else. Innovation is simply spiritual creativity applied with practical wisdom. It starts with asking God, what have you put in my hands that I haven't used yet? And then doing something with it. Because multiplication doesn't come to the passive thinker. It comes to the active builder. When you innovate, you stop chasing money and start chasing mastery. And mastery is what leads to multiplication. Why? Because mastery attracts people, opportunity, and momentum. You don't need 1,000 products. You need one solution, done with excellence. You don't need 10 income streams. You need one system that works, that can be duplicated. Multiplication is not about hustle. It's about alignment. It's about taking your God-given idea and putting it in the right environment, with the right execution, so it can bear fruit over and over again. You weren't created for maintenance mode. You were created for multiplication. God designed your mind to see what others miss, build what others only dream about, and do what others are too afraid to attempt. But you'll never tap into that power if you keep letting a job define your limits. Your mind is full of blueprints, full of ideas, full of revelation, and every single one of them has the power to multiply. If you're bold enough to act on them, stop waiting for permission, stop praying for provision, start producing. That's the shift. The difference between those who stay stuck and those who walk in supernatural supply. Too many are waiting on a financial breakthrough from heaven while ignoring the instructions they've already received. God isn't withholding your provision. He's waiting on your participation. Heaven responds to obedience, not just emotion. You don't get overflow because you're desperate. You get overflow because you're diligent. You don't unlock abundance because you beg. You unlock it because you build. Prayer is powerful, but without production, its potential left unused. The children of Israel cried out for deliverance, but God didn't drop freedom from the sky. He gave Moses a strategy. Jesus fed 5,000, but he didn't create food out of thin air. He asked, "Wait, what do you have?" When Moses said, "We want food for my famished sons." Jesus asked, "Wait, what do you have?" When the disciples brought him 5 loaves and 2 fish, he multiplied what was already in their hands. That's the kingdom pattern. God starts with what you have, not what you lack. He blesses what you're willing to bring, not what you complain about missing. If you're not willing to move with what's already in your possession, you'll never see what's in his promise. There's nothing wrong with prayer, but prayer is not a substitute for process. You can pray for a harvest all day long, but if you never plant a seed, nothing will grow. And the seed is not just money. The seed is time, effort, strategy, discipline, commitment, consistency. You don't reap what you cry over. You reap what you work on. You reap what you develop. You reap what you bring into alignment with God's plan. That means you can't sit back and hope for success. You've got to produce. You've got to show up. You've got to move in faith, even before the outcome is guaranteed. Some pray for opportunities, but reject responsibility. They want the reward, but resist the work. They want overflow, but stay comfortable. But provision is not found in comfort zones. It's found in execution zones. That place where you start doing what you've been shown, even if it's small, even if it's slow, even if it doesn't look like what you imagine. Because when you start producing, heaven starts multiplying. When you move, God meets you in motion. He doesn't respond to hesitation. He responds to faith that moves even when it's uncertain. Every time you pray, God deposits ideas. But if you keep ignoring those ideas and waiting on money, you're out of order. Money follows movement. Money is attracted to purpose in action. Resources follow results. God didn't design you to sit still in fear. He gave you power, love, and a sound mind. That means your next breakthrough isn't just going to come through a miracle. It's going to come through a model, a system, a solution. And all of that requires production, not just passion, not just prayer. Production. You can't ask God to bless work you refuse to do. You can't ask him to multiply something you never started. That business idea won't grow if it stays on the notepad. That course won't change lives if you never record it. That product won't sell if you never launch it. And yet people keep saying they're waiting on God. The truth is, God is waiting on you. He's waiting on you to start, to move, to activate what he's already put in your hands, because faith without works is dead, and prayer without production is just delay, dressed in spiritual language. Provision is always connected to purpose. God doesn't fund fantasy. He funds faithful action. Funds don't function if you're out of alignment with your assignment. Don't expect consistent overflow if you're not walking in your calling. But when you are aligned, when you're walking it out with discipline, provision will chase you down. Because God provides for vision. He backs those who build. He equips those who execute. He multiplies what's being moved, not what's being wished for. If you're stuck in a cycle of waiting, it may not be because you don't have enough. It may be because you haven't done enough with what you already have. Production is a mindset before it's a method. You have to believe what God gave you is enough to get started. Stop disqualifying your own gift. Stop comparing your beginning to someone else's middle. Stop telling yourself you're not ready. If God gave you the instruction, then you're already equipped. And if you're already equipped, the only thing left to do is move, because movement produces momentum, and momentum attracts multiplication. There's a reason farmers don't just pray over empty fields. They till the ground, they plant the seed, they work the land, then they pray for rain. That's the order. Prayer follows production, faith fuels movement, and heaven blesses what you build. But if you keep trying to skip the process, you'll keep forfeiting the promise. God won't override your laziness with his blessing. He won't replace your fear with automatic favor. He moves when you move. He breathes on what you build, and he funds what you finish. The enemy doesn't mind you being spiritual as long as you stay unproductive. He's fine with your prayer life as long as you never take action, because he knows the moment you begin to produce, your influence increases, your income grows, your reach expands, your legacy forms, and now you're no longer just praying for change, you're producing it. That's what makes you dangerous. That's what makes you unstoppable, because you're not just talking about faith, you're working it, you're applying it, you're living it, and that's where real provision lives, in the place where faith meets production. Your wealth is hidden in what you've been ignoring. That's the truth most people don't want to face, because it challenges the excuse that they need more to begin. It's not more resources, more time, more support, or more knowledge. It's the willingness to look again at what you already have. Because what you've been overlooking is where your overflow begins. God never places your provision far from your purpose. It's already close. It's already present. It's already possible. But if you don't recognize it, you won't release it. What you refuse to see, you will never seize. People often say they're waiting on a breakthrough, but they walk past the answer every single day. The breakthrough is not out there. It's in your house. It's in your hands. It's in your habits. It's in that idea you keep pushing aside. It's in that skill you stop developing. It's in the conversation you've been afraid to have. It's in the content you're scared to post. That thing you've labeled as ordinary is the exact thing heaven has marked as the key to your next level. Because God hides greatness in what looks average. He conceals treasure in plain sight. Only the faithful will find it. There's something you've been calling small that's actually sacred. That gift you downplay. That perspective you think nobody cares about. That unique way you see the world. It's all a divine clue. But if you're waiting for it to look like someone else's calling, you'll miss the power of your own. Comparison makes you blind to your own brilliance. Too many people chase what looks popular while ignoring what's truly profitable. But God doesn't anoint imitation. He anoints authenticity. Your wealth is not found in trying to become someone else. It's found in owning who you are, how you think, and what you carry. Most people feel overwhelmed, not because they lack opportunity, but because they've mismanaged their attention. They focus on distractions instead of development. They spend time consuming instead of creating. They feed on problems instead of producing solutions. The very thing that could shift their income is often the thing they've labeled as boring or burdensome. But what looks boring becomes beautiful when you add discipline. What looks burdensome becomes a blessing when you apply wisdom. And what seems too basic becomes a blueprint when you approach it with faith. You don't need to discover something new. You need to honor what you've been ignoring. Honor unlocks value. When you honor your voice starts to produce income. When you honor your story begins to transform lives. When you honor your process becomes a platform. But as long as you keep disrespecting what's already in your life, you'll keep disqualifying yourself from the abundance attached to it. God doesn't bless what you pretend to be. He blesses what you're willing to steward. The oil you need is already in your house. That's what the prophet told the widow. She thought she had nothing until he asked her to look again. And when she saw the small jar of oil she had overlooked, he gave her a strategy to multiply it. She didn't get rich from something new. She got rich from something she already had. It wasn't the size of the oil that mattered. It was her willingness to pour it. Pouring is where the miracle happens. Pouring is where increase begins. But you can't pour what you keep ignoring. You can't multiply what you refuse to move on. God gives ideas. but he hides them in inconvenience. He wraps opportunity in obedience. He puts miracles in motion. That means your wealth won't come from comfort. It will come from action, from looking again, from going back to that thing you dismissed, from pulling out that old notebook, from calling that old connection, from finishing that unfinished project, from doing the unglamorous work with a spirit of excellence. Because excellence in what seems small opens doors to what's significant. The problem is never the potential. The problem is the perspective. When you think something is insignificant, you won't give it energy. And what you don't give energy to will never produce fruit. Your words are seeds. Your actions are water. Your belief is sunlight. Your consistency is the atmosphere where results grow. But if you label your gift as average, if you tell yourself it won't matter, if you convince yourself no one will care, then you're starving your own harvest. There are people out there praying for what you've been sitting on. They're searching for the answer that's in your voice, your product, your service, your solution. But if you keep ignoring it, you're not just robbing yourself. You're robbing the people you were called to serve. You don't need a platform to get started. You need obedience. You don't need a large following to be impactful. You need faithfulness, because when you work what you've been given, it begins to work for you. And when you move in alignment, favor finds you. The reason wealth seems out of reach for so many is not because it's unavailable, but because it's disguised. It's wrapped in discipline. It's hidden in sacrifice. It's packaged in routine. And most people don't like those things. They want magic, not mastery. They want miracles, not management. But wealth is not found in fantasy. It's found in what you've been walking past, stepping over and pushing aside. It's found in your uniqueness, your pain, your revelation, your journey. All of it matters. All of it qualifies. All of it can be transformed into overflow if you're willing to take it seriously.